Good evening, everyone. My name's Gemma Wooltorton, and I'm sort of chairing or moderating tonight's webinar. So it gives me great pleasure to say that the Australian Cardijn Institute is partnering with Parramatta's Mission Enhancement team to present this seminar. It's on the 24th of May of this year. It marks the 10th year anniversary of Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home. Tonight, as I said, we're partnering with the Diocese of Parramatta's Mission Enhancement Team. MET is the acronym for it. So with Sebastian, Salaske-Lentern and Sue Martin, these two wonderful presenters are going to reflect on the ecological journey that Francis has taken us on in the past 10 years. Have we made enough progress in tackling the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss? Or is it a time to despair? What can give us hope for the path ahead in this Jubilee year and beyond? So I'm very grateful to introduce you to Sebastian Salaske-Lentern. I'm not sure if I say your first part of your name right, but hopefully. Lives and works on Darug country. He is the Peace, Justice and Ecology Coordinator for the Catholic Diocese of Parramatta, a member of the local mission enhancement team that's MET, and chair of the Diocesan Laudato Si action team. He holds a doctorate in theology from the University of Münster in Germany and has previously taught and volunteered in academic, church and community contexts. Sebastian is passionate about engaging faith communities in social and environmental justice and taking gospel-inspired collaborative action for people and planet. And he's joined by Sue Martin, who also lives and works on Darug country. She is an agricultural scientist by training, currently working in the leadership team at Jesuit Ignatian Spirituality Australia, with deep connections to Catholic Earth Care Australia. In the Diocese of Parramatta, Sue advocates for country and reconciliation. She is part of St Madeleine's parish, Kentthurst, and a member of the Diocesan Laudato Si action team. Sue is passionate about connecting love of the environment with her faith, working to grow a green heart in the church and caring for our common home in a spirit of Bala Galili, I think you say it, Yolngu, for giving and taking, co-creating balance through relationships of reciprocity and responsibility. So we welcome everyone to our webinar tonight, and if you have any questions, please write them in the chat and we'll look at those towards the end. And at the end of the seminar, it's optional. There is a feedback survey that will go on the chat line. So if you have time to complete or copy the link and complete it at a later time, our presenters would be very grateful for that. So welcome, and I'm handing you back to Paul.
Thanks, Gemma. And as we gather tonight, I would particularly like to acknowledge the traditional owners. I sit on the land of the Darug people. The Darug people have cared for this place for tens of thousands of years, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to extend that respect to any First Nations people who are joining us here this evening. And also, as we gather together, I'd like to share a prayer, and the prayer that I'm using tonight is one of the prayers that Pope Francis included in the Laudato Si statement. It's actually, there are two prayers at the end, and this is one of them. So let us pray. All-powerful God, you are present in the universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with your peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain, at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. Amen. So am I handing back to you, Gemma, or are we going to go straight to Sebastian?
I'll hand it over to Sebastian, and you lead the way, and Sue. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much, Gemma and Paul, for this wonderful welcome, and thanks for everyone who's here tonight. A special shout out to our friends from the Diocese of Parramatta. I've already welcomed some of them, but if anyone else has joined in the last few minutes, a very warm welcome to you and to everyone. And maybe Sue can say a few words while I try to get our PowerPoint up and running.
So, thanks, Sebastian. And yes, Sebastian and I are part of the Laudato Si team in Parramatta. So we're going to be team sharing, and I might help Sebastian along, and Sebastian's going to help me along. So over to you, Sebastian.
Sounds like a good plan. And there we have a presentation. I hope everyone can see that. That bar in the middle should disappear in a second. And yes, Sue and I are going to talk on 10 years since our late Pope Francis published Laudato Si. It's, I think, another fortnight until the actual anniversary comes along, the 24th of May. And in the lead up to that, we want to kind of have a look back at the last 10 years, delve a bit into Laudato Si itself, but also have a bit of a look forward in terms of, in this currently very afflicted world, where do we see signs of hope, particularly since it is the 2025 Jubilee year of hope. So what we want to try and do with you in the next 30 to 40 minutes is give you a bit of an overview of the encyclical Laudato Si in its historic context, even though it's only been 10 years, and then reflect on the journey that the Church and the world has taken since 2015, and then also have a look at where we are placed now when we talk about ecological questions. Leading into signs of hope in this Jubilee year and beyond, and then some few opportunities for actual action that can grow out of what we have shared. And then hopefully there will still be plenty of time for questions and answers. Apologies that this black window in the middle is still there, or that black field. I hope that will disappear over time. Now, as probably most of you would know, Laudato Si didn't just fall from the sky and suddenly we started talking about ecological questions, about climate change, an ecological crisis when Pope Francis published Laudato Si in 2015. In the modern era, we have had an environmental movement and an awareness of an environmental or ecological crisis in our world, at least since the 1970s. And I was obviously not around at the time, but I'm sure some of you would be able to tell me that it even goes back further. But I think that's kind of the start of the modern era environmental movement. And Christians and also Catholics in particular have been part of this global movement from the outset. So it's not something that came to Christians or people of faith later down the track. There have been prominent Catholic voices in all of this, also from the beginning. Basically, all popes since the Second Vatican Council have spoken on the environmental crisis in our world and of the need to care for God's creation, even if it was just paragraphs here and there in their writings or in speeches. And this basically, from the top of the church all the way down, we have had people standing up for God's creation and speaking up as well. Bishops' conferences around the world have done that too. And here in Australia, well before Laudato Si, our bishops published one of their annual social justice statements in 2002 on a new earth, the environmental challenge. But then we got to 2015, and in the meantime, on the international political landscape, international negotiations and climate summits had been going on for years and years. Not really successful. We had the Kyoto Protocol at least as something, but then that kind of started to run out. And in the lead up to the COP21 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris 2021, a lot of you may remember that there was a strong anticipation that finally there may be a breakthrough on the political in the political arena. And in the lead up to that, very strategically, Pope Francis published Laudato Si on care for our common home, not just specifically on climate change, but in the understanding that this could be a document that's not just speaking to Catholics, but to people around the world, people of goodwill, and ideally even to political leaders who would then be in those negotiations. And it was the very first time that a pope addressed the environmental crisis in a major document, in an encyclical. Now, I might hand over to Sue to share a bit about where the name Laudato Si actually comes from, in case anyone doesn't know, because that links us to something special happening last year and this year as well.
Yeah, so thanks, Sebastian. So it is a bit clunky that it's this Latin term and trying to connect with everyone, but Laudato Si being praised be in Latin, and praised be linking back to St. Francis of Assisi, and Pope Francis prophetically took on that name and took on that connection to all that Francis of Assisi stood for. And the canticle is such a beautiful thing. And it's 800 years old last year, but we connect it this year and celebrate. So yes, it's just beautiful.
Thank you, Sue. I think you'll keep talking about this slide as well,
and
what realities Laudato Si actually responds to. So
I love that Laudato Si took on that Cardijn method of See, Judge, Act, and it is a document that's easily read. It is an encyclical, so it will be with us in our Catholic teaching forever, now that we've lost Pope Francis. But the realities of Laudato Si, it asked us to really see the world and look at those planetary crises and that triple whammy of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. And it really linked to the planetary boundaries and some of the work that was happening in the scientific community. So yes, it did also linked to the injustices of our time, and that all those, the social, and trying to get us to really critically think about the world that we lived in. And so for me, there's so much about Laudato Si that I love. but it is giving us a way to show what does ecological conversion look like and what are we asked to do. But it also gave us a sense of what is integral ecology and the integrated, that we're all connected. And so it gave us a new terminology around integral ecology. But Francis wanted us to critique our world, and he named the dominant technocratic paradigm. And so he was really critiquing the status quo and really asking us to step up. And he was a leader, always calling out that change needed to happen.
Thanks, Sue. And maybe just adding to that, we didn't want to take you through the whole document, and we also didn't want to, claim that we know what the most important insights from Laudato Si are, but we definitely agreed that these ecological conversion, integral ecology, and kind of that on the backdrop of what Pope Francis calls the technocratic paradigm are our favorite insights from Laudato Si. So I'll speak a bit about that technocratic paradigm and ecological conversion, and then we'll throw back to Sue about the integral ecology, because she's actually got a science background. So we'll be very well placed to speak about that. So Pope Francis talks about kind of the ecological as well as social problems that we see in our world, being ultimately or coming ultimately from what he calls this dominant technocratic paradigm in our society. And what he means by that is firstly an unquestioned or uncritical belief in the benefits of scientific and technological progress, as well as economic development and growth. And it's basically the idea that those things, scientific and technological progress, as well as economic development and growth, can fix all our problems. So, the market can fix it all, or if we just find the right technology that can fix it all. And kind of not realizing that it's precisely the uncritical trust in those things that brings about environmental and social challenges in the first place. So we're trying to fix something with something that's actually created the problem in the first place. And that kind of technocratic paradigm for Francis is also paired with the notion of us humans wanting to control nature and assert power over it for our benefit, for our use, which not necessarily in this day and age, but historically has often been underpinned by a misunderstood interpretation of Genesis 1:28, which is the so-called dominion mandate, where God invites people to have dominion over the earth and everything in and on it, which then has been misunderstood as, we can use it for our benefit, rather than we are called to be stewards over God's creation or within God's creation. And Francis is very clear that science, technology, and economic development are not bad in itself. He says when they are well directed, they can produce important means of improving the quality of our human life. But at the same time, and these are quotes from Laudato Si, our immense technological development has not been accompanied by a development in human responsibilities, values, and conscience. And that's why, to Francis, according to Francis, we have started not just taking just what we need, but to actually exploit and destroy our planet, including all the non-human creatures in it, but also our own civilization. And some symptoms of that are things like excessive extractivism of coal or minerals, the fact that our lifestyle is killing and bringing many, many species to extinction, not because we want to kill them, but just as a collateral. But also things like disregard for the animal welfare of our domestic animals, and in the human sphere, labor exploitation, modern slavery, human trafficking, just to name a few. Now, on the backdrop of that analysis, Francis then introduces the idea of ecological conversion. And that, if I understand Laudato Si right, is a change of heart, which can lead us to really deeply love not just our fellow human beings, our neighbors in biblical speech, but every part of nature, and to actually love all of our fellow creation like kin or like family members. And that ecological conversion is rooted in the faith in God as the loving creator and sustainer of everything, and also in the transformative encounter with Jesus Christ, through whom all things were made according to the Nicene Creed. And Francis has this beautiful quote in Laudato Si where he says that as part of the universe, not just Earth, but the universe, called into being by one Father, all of us, humans and non-human beings, are linked by unseen bonds and together form a kind of universal family, a sublime communion which fills us with a sacred, affectionate, and humble respect. And out of that respect also grows a mutual responsibility. The world around us cares for us. We depend on it, and therefore, mutually, we are also responsible for all of God's creation. So ecological conversion is really embracing our place in creation. And that then in Laudato Si translates into a massive call to action in practical ways. But the kind of foundation for that is this ecological conversion. And while that is a kind of spiritual or theological approach at reality, Sue will now share that from a scientific point of view, you can come to very similar conclusions.
So thanks, Sebastian. And I know we've got to rush a little bit, but it is about it being a scientific notion as well, that we're all connected. And Thomas Berry talks about, or Brian Swim, that, we all come from dust and everything is cycled through. And so we are so interdependent and interconnected. So it is about us really knowing that we're in that cycle. And I love that image that Sebastian had on the slide before. So just when we speak of environment, it is us really putting those, we really mean it's that relationship between all in the ecosystems and the web of life. So we are part of nature and included in it, and thus in constant interaction with it. So we depend on it, and we need to know that we can't keep extracting as we are. So so our survival is dependent on it. So that gets us on to really thinking about, it's not two separate crises. It's not us having a biodiversity crisis and a social justice crisis. It's the complexity of it, and it's the connectedness of it. And this statement from Laudato Si, which has been picked up in the social justice statements and picked up in, all we sort of think about Laudato Si number 49, a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. It's one cry. And sometimes now us in Jesuit social services really want to unpack what does the cry of the poor, and I sometimes call it the cry of those made poor, and it's us as all interconnected, looking at that.
Now, that was a bit of a deep dive into Laudato Si and its context. And now we want to take you very briefly through the past 10 years in terms of some milestones that have happened on the way before we want to have a look at where we are placed now. And one important development that came out of Laudato Si and the Curia reform that Francis undertook in Rome, in the Vatican, was the establishment of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, which brought together former pontifical councils that looked at various aspects of peace and justice and ecological awareness and integrated them all into each other, following that idea of integral human development and integral ecology, that everything is connected and we can't look at those issues separately. And this dicastery has been a major driver, together with kind of bottom-up ecological church movements, in driving Laudato Si in the following years. In 2020, which was the 5-year anniversary of Laudato Si, there was meant to be a celebration of that, which then kind of had to all happen online because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But it kind of initiated the annual celebration of Laudato Si Week, which in Australia we celebrate from the 16th to 24th May every year. It's a bit different in some parts overseas. And apart from, as Sue mentioned earlier on, the fact that as an encyclical, Francis's teaching will remain with us even after he has left us. I also think and hope that Laudato Si Week as an annual celebration will stay with us as a lasting legacy of his pontificate. Another year later, kind of after the 5-year anniversary had come to an end, the so-called Laudato Si Action Platform was launched. And I think that was a bit of an outcome of realizing in those 5 years that while we had this encyclical and this teaching, not too many practical things came out of it. So the Dicastery for Integral Human Development and especially the International Laudato Si movement, which is like a bottom-up kind of grassroots movement, initiated this platform and the so-called 7 Laudato Si goals as some more graspable, practical things that we can all do in our church and beyond to drive ecological conversion. And maybe we won't go through this now just in terms of time, but it's very well worth to have a look at what those 7 Laudato Si goals mean in detail. They are response to the cry of the earth, to the cry of the poor, ecological economics, adoption of sustainable lifestyles, ecological spirituality, ecological education, and community resilience and empowerment. And the so-called Laudato Si Action Platform is an international platform that any, typically Catholic, but I think it's even open beyond that, any Catholic diocese, parish, school, university, business, organization can join and then commit itself to a process of assessing what they are doing in regards to those 7 Laudato Si goals, and then to develop a Laudato Si action plan to say in the next year, in the next 2 years, we want to try those things to reach or come closer to putting those 7 goals into practice. And then get into a habit of reassessing, well, how have we performed, and what do we want to do next to improve further on our way to becoming more sustainable and more in tune with Laudato Si. That same year when the Laudato Si Action Platform was launched, our Australian bishops picked that up and made their annual social justice statement, focused their annual social justice statement on the 7 goals and the Laudato Si Action Platform, and invited the entire Catholic Church in Australia to kind of come along on that journey. But what they also did is that they linked all of this to the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia when they said that when it comes to human knowledge of the lands and waters now known as Australia, it is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are our first teachers. And they really emphasize that we cannot do ecological care for creation work in Australia without listening to the wisdom of the first peoples of this continent who have done that same work for thousands and thousands of years. And then another important step was a year later when the 5th Plenary Council of Australia focused one of their decrees on ecological conversion. And I might quickly throw back to Sue
Yes,
to
thanks,
share a bit about that.
Sebastian. And this is a pivotal moment in the 10 years, and Decree 8 for Australia puts it into the work of all our Australian dioceses, and then flowing out to our schools and parishes and all our Catholic organisations. And I do want to acknowledge the work of Dr. Sandy Cornish to really help that plenary council bring this to attention. And Caritas has taken courage of ensuring that Decree 8 is taken up and championed. So yes, so Decree 8, even though the decrees haven't been accepted, given back to us by Rome, the Curia, they've been a bit busy, but it is there for us again. It's a legacy. And Decree 8 with Decree 1, which was Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander inclusion in our church life, just very exciting for us.
And while the plenary council happened, again, a lot of you will remember this, we were also trying to do our bit here in Australia as part of the global synod on synodality. So a lot of the kind of listening and the documents that were then developed here in Australia had a strong emphasis on care for creation and Laudato Si as well. And as Sue has already mentioned, there were a lot of then practical opportunities that came out of this. Catholic Earthcare Australia, which is now part of Caritas Australia, kind of reimagined their already existing Catholic Earthcare program for parishes, for schools, organizations, and also for families and households to be aligned with the 7 Laudato Si goals. And they have become a quite practical vehicle that any organization in Australia can use to pursue those 7 goals, rather than signing up to the international platform, which can be a bit complicated. Catholic Earthcare provides a very kind of locally adapted vehicle to try and pursue those 7 Laudato Si goals through those Catholic Earthcare programs. If we take stock how the International Laudato Si Action Platform and this idea of developing action plans has been received at the kind of top level of the Catholic Church in Australia, there's still a lot of room for more. So out of 25 archdioceses and dioceses in Australia, plus 5 Eastern Rite dioceses, only a handful have really taken that journey all the way through, or at least got started. Sue's and my own diocese, Parramatta, is kind of, has signed on and kind of has passed the ball of developing a Laudato Si action plan to some of our major agencies, which is happening, but nothing has been kind of finalized and published yet. And then the last thing I think that's definitely important to mention as a milestone in the last 10 years was Pope Francis's apostolic exhortation Laudato Deum. Some people say he got a bit cranky because after Laudato Si and then, offering this practical vehicle of the action platform and the 7 goals, still things didn't happen fast enough and the Catholic Church didn't come along on a large scale. So Laudato Deum was a kind of strong reminder of Laudato Si with a very dedicated focus on climate change, but also strategically, again, published in the lead up to another COP summit, so another UN climate conference in Dubai. And Pope Francis basically, apart from reminding people of Laudato Si, called for a decisive acceleration of an energy transition away from fossil resources in Laudato Si. Which brings us to the question, well, if we look at climate change and pollution and biodiversity loss, where are we actually placed 10 years since Laudato Si? And if you just look at the news, it will not surprise anyone in this virtual room, I think, that, we're not in the best place we could be. So just a few kind of news articles from 2 years ago, when the International Panel for Climate Change, like the advisory body to the United Nations, published their last report and gave a strong warning that we are going to miss the 1.5 global warming goal since the industrial period or the start of industrialization, which all signatories to the Paris Agreement of 2015 have agreed to. So they were basically saying, get your stuff together, otherwise we will fail. And I'll just click out. I think we're all aware what climate change means for us here in Australia. Firstly, that it is already happening, that it's not in a far future anymore, but that it increases now on a yearly basis, extreme weather events like floods, like extreme heat, and bushfires as well. And that was 2023 when we were warned we might miss that 1.5 degree goal, and that we may surpass that threshold within the next 10 years. And then at the start of this year, we learned that last year we already surpassed it. So 2024 was the first year that globally, the global average temperature over the course of the year surpassed 1.5 degrees warming since the start of the industrial period. And in fact, not just by 0.0 something, but by 0.05. So it was 1.55 degrees in 2024 as an annual average temperature over the start of the industrial era. And this is just a little graphic that shows you since the 1970s, since we started to become aware of this problem, how the global temperature has risen and risen and risen, with a few kind of dents, but kind of a very clear trajectory upwards. And then last year over this plus 1.5 threshold. And as Pope Francis said very, very clearly in Laudato Si, despite the many negotiations and agreements and what political players around the world have been trying to do, the global emissions continue to increase rather than decrease, and thus the temperature continues to rise. This is just as a quick visualization.
You might go quickly, Sebastian.
Yeah, maybe we'll actually jump through that, jump over this, and just recommend to everyone to have a look at climateactiontracker.org, which is a fabulous non-for-profit website that tracks how countries around the world are performing in relation to the Paris Agreement. As you can see, no green countries, lots of dark red and orange countries around the world. So we're not doing that well, to be honest. And there's also then the possibility to look at individual countries, so how Australia is performing, and a bit of reasoning around why Australia's performance is actually not sufficient up to this date.
And the NDC is nationally determined commitments, and we are not ambitious in what we have said we will do. So
but maybe we're lucky and we'll get a little nudge next year.
Well, yeah, the fingers crossed. If we're up against Turkey to host COP31, and it wasn't announced between Turkey and us because of the threat of us going nuclear. That threat's gone. The hope is rising that we might get COP31, but We won't know
So-
for a little while, but if we do, that ambition will hopefully rise. We'll all get behind it and be
This November, Brazil is hosting, and I think at the end of the summit they'll announce who's going to host the next one. If it were Australia, that hopefully would give our government and everyone a push to be a good host and get the climate negotiations up and running again. Now, similar when it comes to biodiversity loss, we're at this point in time, our species extinction is currently 10 to 100 times higher than what it would be without human interference. And that's not just sad in terms of whole species disappearing from our planet, but it affects us and our human civilization as well. And you will all remember that the COVID pandemic was testimony to that. What happens when our human sphere of influence moves out too far into the wild, and we kind of the natural network of species starts to deteriorate through our influence. And the same applies to pollution. The biggest one that I'm sure we're all aware of is plastic pollution, and it becomes more and more clear that that's not just, a problem for some animals in the oceans, but that actually plastic pollution worsens the impacts of all planetary boundaries. So our entire planetary system is affected negatively by that pollution. And it's still on the rise worldwide. In Australia, we're starting to see a bit of a drop in plastic pollution, but as this snapshot shows, plastic is obviously not the only problem.
That was when the container deposits have impacted litter, but
Yes.
plastic really impacts our endocrine systems, and so we're sort of shifting things in our health budget as well as our other budgets. But yes.
Now, overall, you can say that awareness has risen in the past 10 years, both in society and in our church, but it has been undermined regularly by other issues that were all important and often perceived as more urgent, wars, a pandemic, things like that, which have always then taken attention away from the urgent need to tackle climate change and this triple environmental crisis. And to come back to Pope Francis's talk about the technological paradigm, we're still mostly trying to tackle these problems through technical solutions, through inventing new things, through optimizing our energy use and things like that. But we're not really moving away from this understanding of we can just take as much as we want for our comfort and economic growth. So we're not shifting away from that technocratic paradigm. In that sense, Laudato Si has still a lot to teach us and to learn. And as we've already seen, things are tracking, we're starting to get there in our Catholic Church in Australia, but there's also a lot of room for more. One definite kind of light of hope is always to not forget that the Catholic Church is not just dioceses and parishes and Catholic schools, but also our religious orders and congregations. And to just name a few without, saying that there's not many, many more that are doing good work in the ecological space. I think we can also learn a lot from a lot of our religious orders and congregations here in Australia and worldwide. Now, that all said, let's have a look at, things are a bit dire, especially in terms of ecological things, but also in terms of peace and conflict around the world. What are some signs of hope in this Jubilee year, but also in general? And a few things that Sue and I wanted to share with you are these. Maybe Sue, you can kick off with the first one.
So with the Jesuits, being part of Global Talks has been important. and the congregations are part of the global many congregations are. But I was part of the Bonn, which was a Fiji hosting, and it happened in Bonn. And it was when Trump came in the first time and pulled out. But I just want to share with you that California stepped up, and it was strong at COP. And even though America pulled out, the states in America were ambitious, and there was lots of hope in the tent or the pavilion, even though, yes, what's happening with Trump maybe shifts the other way, but there is lots of hope there. And
I think we can even take that a level further. We see states stepping up where federal governments don't do their part. And we often see local councils step up where states aren't doing their part.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even if things are not moving at the big international level or at that political level, we see things happening the closer you get to your own sphere of influence, which is good and gives us hope. And we see that growing engagement of civic society, including faith organizations. And Sue mentioned these faith pavilions that we're starting that are getting bigger and bigger at these international climate conferences and negotiations. So people are stepping in where political leaders are falling short of what needs to be done. And then even in our Catholic Church, globally and also here in Australia, while, Pope Francis clearly hasn't been happy with how hesitant and slow the uptake of the Laudato Si goals and Laudato Si action plans have been. Still, there is a raised and growing awareness, and at least an appetite for action as well.
And it won't go away.
And it won't go away.
It won't go away. There's ecclesial networks all around ecology across the globe, in the Congo, in the Amazon, in Asia Pacific. So our church conversations will continue.
And of course, when we say church, let's not just think of our Catholic Church. And I'm not even sure if everyone here in this room is affiliated with the Catholic Church. Let's always think broader. Let's look ecumenically, interfaith, civic society. These are just some examples of things happening in those spaces. The international Laudato Si movement that we mentioned, Catholic Earth Care here in Australia, the Diocese of Parramatta and the Archdiocese of Sydney are part of the Sydney Alliance. The Diocese of Maitland-Newcastle is in the Hunter Community Alliance, and the Archdiocese of Brisbane and probably some other dioceses in Queensland are members of the Queensland Community Alliance, who all work together in a national platform called Renew Australia for All, where faith and civic organizations are coming together to put pressure on our government to step up the game in ecological progress. There's the Faith Ecology Network. There's ARC, Australian Religious Response to Climate Change, which is an interfaith platform. So, lots of spaces for people to get involved in as well and try to do their part in moving Laudato Si forward in our country and globally. And then we've mentioned it in terms of the social justice statement from a few years ago. There is a slow but growing understanding of the need to learn from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities' wisdom in caring for country. And maybe Sue can speak to a few points.
Yes.
As well.
So I'll just share the notion of cool burning or doing culture burning. It's growing. It's growing in this diocese. It's growing across Australia. So that's getting back to traditional ways of managing land. Recently in the Hawkesbury Nepean, all the traditional owner groups, Darkinjung, Gundungurra, Darug and Darwul, came together to talk about a declaration for water country, which is just exciting. And Jesuit Social Services has a centre for just places, and that is a way of really looking at place and having ecological justice, social justice, being faith in action. So yes, there are signs of hope.
And with those signs of hope come opportunities to take action. Since we're in a room that, or in a virtual room that has been opened up by the Australian Cardijn Institute, we want to remind you again, as Sue did at the start, Francis used the Cardijn method of See, Judge, Act in Laudato Si. And I think that's an expertise that anyone who's working in that space can bring in. So get involved in any of those networks if you aren't already, and you know, remind people of this important method of thinking and acting. Just two very concrete things that are happening in this upcoming Laudato Si week and this year. One, Sue is actually very actively involved in Catholic Religious Australia, is hosting a 10,000 trees for the 10th anniversary initiative, with the hope that at least 10,000 trees will be planted around Australia.
And I know Jeff at Winborn at Mulgoa has committed to 1,000. Thanks, Jeff.
Amazing. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to the Catholic Religious Australia website, and there is a link then to this campaign. There will also be a launch of this program on the 28th of May. So if anyone's interested in that, we can certainly follow up with a registration link. And for the first time in many years, the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference's Office for Justice, Ecology and Peace and Caritas Australia have teamed up to bring together some resources for this Laudato Si week, as well as a webinar. And they are linking Laudato Si week with an international campaign called Turn Debt into Hope. So for the Jubilee year, it's the idea of debt relief for mostly developing countries that are being strangled by unjust international debt. And there's a petition that people can get involved in. There's a launch webinar in a week's time. And all of that can be found at on the Caritas website, caritas.org.au/debt. Very easy to remember. And then last but not least, a very easy but very impactful way that everyone can take, if you haven't already done that, is to have a look at, you know, with which bank do you have your bank account and with which super fund do you have your super. You can find that information on a website called marketforces.org.au, and they have analyzed banks and super funds in Australia against if and to what degree they invest or do not invest in fossil fuel prospecting, extraction, and energy production, and then offer the option to basically call out your bank or your super fund and ask them to stop that or to move away to an alternative that doesn't invest in fossil fuels. And you're very, very warmly invited to subscribe to our Peace, Justice, Ecology newsletter from the Diocese of Parramatta. You can find that at tinyurl.com/pjenews. And with a very similar link, tinyurl.com/pjefeedback, we would, at the end of this presentation, very warmly invite you to very briefly share how you found this presentation. There's just a simple 1 was poor performance, 10 was very good. And you can leave a comment if you wish. You don't have to do that now, but if you have a mobile phone at hand, feel free to scan this QR code. If you're on the chat, I've just put this link in the chat as well. Feel free to open that up, and then after we wrap up, you're warmly invited to leave us a feedback if you wish. But that for now ends our little presentation. And I think Sue and I are both very grateful that we had this opportunity to share a bit about Laudato Si and the past 10 years since Pope Francis published it with you. And let's see if there are any questions. For anyone who hasn't been keeping an eye on their phone, I just saw black smoke as well. So no need to rush to the TV and look who the next Pope will be. Will take apparently more time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sebastian and Sue. Are there any questions? Oh, yes, there is saying, can we receive the recording of the webinar? Yes, that will come out. We're not sure how long it'll take. It usually doesn't take that long, but it'll come out on the ACI website. So does it get sent out to the participants, Paul?
I think everybody on this list will receive our next newsletter.
Yeah.
And it will, I certainly imagine the link will be in that newsletter, so I would think so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to make? There's certainly a lot of food for thought.
I might just mention one little thing that sometimes comes to my mind is it's such an amazing and a beautiful and Sebastian and I have really unpacked and all of those things. But Francis was a man of his time, and there really weren't that many women's voices in Laudato Si, and so maybe the next Pope can work on that aspect of Laudato Si, or maybe it's the Pope after. But anyway, I'll just share that with you all.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, if there's no other questions or comments, I'd just like to say thank you to Sebastian and Sue for this wonderful presentation tonight. Your thoughtful insights, challenges, and commitment to this important topic. I'm sure we're all going away with food for thought, ideas, and challenges to reflect on, and to also reflect on our own action. I thought about when you were talking, sort of a challenge that kept coming up for me in my mind. I kept thinking, how do we bring our leaders and others around us along on the journey to be stewards of our common home? There's things happening, but there's still a lot more to happen. How do we get people to take mutual responsibility? And I just thought that was so important that it's about mutual responsibility. It's not handing it over to just one group of people, or that there is the environment and there's care of the environment, care of the people. It's not always easy, but it is an important challenge. And I've always loved that. I remember, when I was way back, a young girl at school, learning about that whole, how do we hear the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor? And, that was from Laudato Si 49. What does that actually mean? Do we listen? Do we hear? And I think that's where, our conversations with other people is so important to help people connect with this call. Oh, sorry, Frank.
Could I just say, I've been reading a book, Last Child in the Woods.
Love that book. I love that book. Yeah.
But are we really trying to get people into nature to get their hands, get the feel, get the love of it? Or are they just so wrapped up about their life that they're living that, the one that's full of tinsel and plastic and glad wrap. But what happens to the actual soil and the bush? And we're not getting there.
Well, I know when I was teaching and in a leadership role, we certainly did work with our staff around that. We paid a lot of money to have someone in. And, about reminding people to get in touch with the earth. However, you know, from what I could observe, the busyness of people's lives, the distraction of, you know, social media, technology, it sort of, you know, takes people away from it. And that's the challenge. It is a big challenge, you know. But if we can influence one or two people, you know, if we can bring someone along with us, we're making a big difference. Sorry, Sue?
Oh, sorry, Gemma, but I put in the chat, Frank, a project that you can help me with.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's going to address all those little concerns you've got. So it is
Yes.
very much a work in progress. And Frank, I'd love your help.
That's
Because
that one.
for those of you who don't know, Frank actually one of his big passions and one of the things he does is organizing retreats and things like that in nature where people can
Yes.
actually get that
Good
hands-on
Mai.
experience.
Wooltorton, Frank.
Yes. Wooltorton is a beautiful place to be.
Yes. Yeah.
And
And I guess
Colleen
that's-
has just
Go on.
So I was just going to say, Colleen has just posted that in their parish they're doing a table talk, so like a community conversation around ecological conversion, to get people thinking and talking about that more. Another great way of engaging, I think.
So are there any more questions, comments?
I think Julie wanted some next steps, but
Yeah.
Julie, we're waiting for Blackheath to be the social and ecological justice hub of the diocese, and then we'll do we'll come and
We are.
we'll all
Yeah.
come and visit you.
Oh, yes.
And
I
maybe
think coming.
oh yeah, sorry, Sebastian.
No, go.
Well, I was just going to say, Julie's got a dream that her parish will be a social and ecological justice hub. And wouldn't that be a dream, a beautiful dream to have in every diocese? So there you go.
Yes. Yes.
And so the challenge is, or the question is, how do we bring others along with us in that journey? You know, how do we get other parishes to, or dioceses to have those hubs? Something to consider.
Mm.
Any more questions, comments?
Just another quick comment on the question that you actually posed and then partly also answered yourself, Gemma. You know, how do we get leadership to come along? And I like that you said, well, you know, it's not just about leadership, it's about everyone. But nonetheless, a lot of bigger things don't happen if we don't get leadership on board. And part of the work that Sue and I have been doing in our Diocesan Laudato Si team has been trying to get leadership along. And we have a bishop that is very, very forward thinking in that space. But then between the bishop and our kind of level of engagement, there's lots of other levels of leadership where we've been trying to get people on board. And I think the biggest challenge is not so much to get people interested and thinking that this is important. Everyone in our diocese at that kind of level of leadership would say, yes, ecological conversion and sustainability, that's important, but it's still not top of the agenda. So there's still so many other things that keep us busy, that this hasn't become mainstream in our church and in our society. And this is where I love the idea that or the kind of little catchphrase that Sue uses a lot is like, we need to green the heart of our church and of our society. We need to just, at the end of the day, keep going and trying to bring people along, and not to blame anyone if they haven't come along, but to just make that offer.
Yep. And I think when you say that about, you know, when we get to grassroots and that, I think, you know, our young people are going to be the ones who are going to bring about the change. And so, you know, I think there's a really strong call to be working with our teachers, our schools, to, you know, get them to come on board.
Gemma,
And
I've put the challenge in the
Yeah.
chat.
Yep. And you know, that is, but like I know teachers, they're like what we were saying, there's lots of things they're juggling as well. They've got lots of different groups wanting them to have emphasis, and you get directives to say that you can do this, this, and this, you know. Yeah, how do you do it? So I guess we're at time. So I just want to again say thank you to Sebastian and Sue. You've provided us with a lot of food for thought, and I hope each and every one of us can go away with perhaps one action that we can do. You know, whether it's reflecting on the questions that people have raised tonight. And the Australian Cardijn Institute are very grateful to Parramatta for our diocese for partnering with us. And we're happy to, you know, partner with other people, other dioceses, if they're, you know, they're involved or interested in something that we might be able to do with them. So thank you. And thank you everyone for attending tonight.
Thank you, Gemma.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gemma. Thanks,
Thank you.
Sebastian. Thanks, Sue. Good to see you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.